Veronica Monroe, the director of the FBI, was wrongfully arrested one night by two police officers who failed to verify her identity simply because she was a black woman driving a luxury car. After having dinner with colleagues, Veronica was heading to her black Mercedes-Benz in a nearly empty parking lot when a police car approached her. Officer Travis Calloway, with his hand on his holster, questioned her suspiciously, asking what she was doing out so late. Calmly, she explained she had just finished dinner at a nearby restaurant and was heading to her car. Despite her composed response and clear identification, including her driver's license and FBI badge, Calloway remained skeptical, mocking her credentials and insisting on checking them. Veronica identified herself again as the FBI director, but Officer Sutter rudely told her to stay quiet. They aggressively ordered her to put her hands on her head and, despite her full cooperation, handcuffed her on the spot. Curious passers-by began to watch as the officers treated her like a criminal. Inside the police car, Veronica remained silent, reflecting on the injustice she was enduring and how symbolic this moment was of a much larger systemic issue. The officers, oblivious to the gravity of their mistake, mocked her claims, assuming she had stolen both the car and the badge. At the police station, Veronica was led through the corridors like any other suspect. She was placed in a small interrogation room, still handcuffed, and questioned about the real owner of the car and her allegedly fake credentials. Veronica remained firm and composed, warning that the officers were making a serious mistake. While Sutter went to check her identity in the system, Calloway continued to threaten her with legal consequences for impersonating a federal agent. When Sutter returned visibly shaken, he called Calloway outside urgently. Moments later, both officers re-entered with their captain, Richard Bennett, who, filled with panic and regret, quickly apologized to Veronica and removed her handcuffs. She did not accept the explanation of a misunderstanding and instead called it what it truly was, a blatant case of racial prejudice and abuse of power. She reminded them that their failure to check her identity before humiliating her publicly could have ended very differently if she weren't someone with power and influence. Captain Bennett promised disciplinary actions, but Veronica was not satisfied with empty promises. She pointed out that the issue was not limited to this incident but was part of a broader systemic problem. The next day, the story had spread nationwide. News outlets and social media were flooded with coverage of the incident. A video filmed by a passerby had gone viral. In the mayor's office, chaos reigned as officials scrambled to manage the fallout. Mayor Everett Sinclair was furious that such a scandal had erupted under his administration. When Veronica arrived for a meeting with him, she made it clear that she wasn't there for apologies, but for action. With unwavering authority, she stated that the issue went far beyond the two officers involved. The chief of police, Martinez, said an internal investigation had been launched, but Veronica dismissed it. The FBI would now handle the case, she declared, and it would involve a deeper examination of the city's police culture. She demanded three things: a full overhaul of interrogation procedures with strict policies against racial profiling, mandatory training for all officers on bias and discrimination, and the creation of an independent civilian oversight committee for police misconduct complaints. Though the mayor and police chief were hesitant, she reminded them that both public opinion and the law were on her side. Outside, crowds of protesters had gathered, chanting and waving signs. The people were demanding justice, and Veronica made it clear that this moment could be a turning point. Pressured and visibly concerned, the mayor agreed to implement her recommendations, though he requested time to organize the reforms. Veronica stood and gave the mayor a deadline, 1 week to present a detailed plan for implementing the reforms. In the meantime, she demanded that Officers Calloway and Sutter not only remain suspended but also be officially relieved of their duties pending the investigation. As she exited the mayor's office, a wave of journalists surrounded her, flashing cameras and calling out questions. When asked whether the incident would lead to changes in FBI procedures or the larger policing system, she paused and addressed the cameras directly. What had happened to her, she declared, was not an isolated incident. It was part of a daily reality for countless citizens without the means or authority to defend themselves. Her fight, she said, was no longer just personal, it was on behalf of all victims of discrimination and abuse of power. As she walked away, the gathered crowd erupted in applause. In that moment, Veronica Monroe became more than just the director of the FBI, she became a symbol of justice, resistance, and hope. 6 months later, her wrongful arrest had grown from a local scandal into a national catalyst for systemic change. The courtroom was packed for the trial of Calloway and Sutter, who now faced nationwide attention. As Judge Anderson prepared to deliver the verdict, the two former officers stood in silence, visibly subdued. Despite their attempts during the trial to justify their actions as routine suspicion and procedure, the evidence against them, particularly the video and testimonies, was undeniable. The judge found both men guilty of abuse of power, unlawful arrest, and civil rights violations. In addition to their sentences, the court issued a lifetime ban preventing them from ever serving in law enforcement again. The room buzzed with quiet astonishment. Such a ruling was rare and historic. The judge emphasized how their actions had not only broken the law but had also deeply damaged the public's trust, an essential cornerstone of any just institution. From the back of the room, Veronica watched in silence, having deliberately chosen not to sit in the front so the spotlight would remain on the case, not on her. This, for her, had never been about personal revenge, it was always about reforming the system. After the trial, a journalist asked her what had changed in the aftermath of her arrest. Veronica responded that in just 6 months, 27 police departments had revised their interrogation protocols. A bill in Congress, bearing her name, was under debate, aiming to implement federal oversight of law enforcement. More than 10,000 officers had undergone training to address unconscious bias. These were, she said, concrete steps forward. But more importantly, the country had finally begun to speak openly about issues it had long ignored. When another journalist asked if she would change anything about that night, Veronica looked into the camera and answered quietly, "I would have spoken up sooner." Her words reached not just the reporters but everyone who had ever felt silenced by injustice. In the weeks that followed, Veronica was invited to the White House for the signing of the Monroe Act, a landmark piece of legislation establishing new federal standards for interrogations and creating independent oversight bodies for police conduct. Later, at a global civil rights conference in Geneva, she shared her story with world leaders. Her message was clear and resonant. The true test of a just system lies not in how it treats the powerful, but in how it protects the vulnerable. She emphasized that her position gave her a voice, and her responsibility was to use that voice for those who didn't have one. A year after the incident, Veronica visited a school in a disadvantaged neighborhood of her hometown. Amid the laughter and curiosity of the children, she saw firsthand the impact of her fight. A young girl told her she wanted to grow up to be like her, to change unfair rules. Veronica gently told her that change comes when brave people decide it's time to act and reminded her that justice should never be a privilege for a few, but a right for all. As she left the school, Veronica reflected on how a single night of injustice had sparked a wave of reform for future generations. The fight was far from over, there would still be setbacks and resistance, but something fundamental had shifted. People who once accepted injustice in silence were now raising their voices. Communities that once felt powerless were organizing and demanding accountability. Institutions that had long resisted change were now being forced to evolve. As she walked, her phone rang. It was the new head of the city police department, calling to inform her that the final phase of the reform program had been implemented. All officers were now equipped with body cameras, and an independent civilian board was overseeing every complaint against the police. Veronica smiled. These were small steps, perhaps, but they were steps in the right direction. The road to true justice would be long, but for the first time in a long while, Veronica felt that real movement had begun. And now, the story turned outward. What is your story? This powerful account invites all of us to reflect on how discrimination still exists, even against those in high positions. But what about the countless others who face these injustices without a voice? Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination? How did you respond? Share your story. If this story moved you, spread the word so others may become aware. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. See you next time.